All right, what's going on? Brad Diaz. If you read the title, not title, the channel name. I hope you did. I don't know. Uh, I'll just keep this short and sweet. This is the beginning of a beginner's guide to photography. All right. If you don't know who I am a photographer. I've been doing photography since like 2019 for at least 2.5 years, or about 2.5 years. I've been doing photography. And yeah, I'm based out of East Orange, New Jersey, all this stuff. I do portraits, I do weddings, I do products, I do a bunch of stuff. All right. So, one thing I've been getting from some people, all right, is that they don't understand how to do photography. They want to learn how to do it, but they don't understand or know where to start. Okay? And, being that I've been doing photography for like a couple of years now, for some years, I think I know pretty well what to do. I think I could teach people. So here we are. Just so you know what I'm gonna talk about today, and this is just gonna be like, it's not even gonna be that long. I'm gonna be talking about the trifecta. All right, the three things that really bugged me when I was starting out. With a Nikon D3100 when I started out with my old camera. Okay, the three things that bugged me: ISO, shutter speed. What was the third one? Aperture. I trust me. I know what I'm talking about. Okay, shutter speed, ISO, and aperture. By the way, I'm not editing this. Anyway, so those three things, right? I'm gonna talk to you about them because they were confusing to me, and I'm sure that for some of us, they're confusing to you. Okay? So, let's begin, right? First thing, and I hope, please, if you don't know how to do this, you might as well click off the video. I'm sorry. Okay? Go on your camera. Oh yeah, by the way, before I even begin, this is the one thing that you got to keep in mind when you're doing photography, when you're starting out. It doesn't matter what camera you have. Okay? If you have a phone, if that's how you're taking photos, by all means, go ahead and do that. If you have a very old camera that's not this kind of camera, if it's like from the early 2000s or whatever you want to do, by all means, use that camera. Use whatever you have available to you and be grateful that you have it, okay? Because this is a beautiful art. This is a beautiful thing, and hopefully you fall in love with it like I did. Doesn't even matter with what you're using. Right? Just don't worry about what you're starting with. I started with the Nikon D3100. It's like an old camera from like 2011, 2010. Considering the time period, it was probably a really good camera, but now it kind of sucks. So, and just keep this in mind, if you know the capabilities of your camera and the limitations of your camera, you can do very well as a photographer, okay? It doesn't matter what you have, all right? It doesn't matter what gear you have. It doesn't matter what camera you have. I have this camera because I've been doing this for years, and I have, experience, and I've done good stuff, right? So, and I knew the capabilities of my old cameras, so I needed to upgrade, right? At this point, you do not need to. You need to learn the basics, and this is what this is for. So, let's start the beginner's guide, right? First thing that you should do: turn on the camera. Simple as that. The video's over. You just turn on the camera. That's it. You don't have to do anything else. Psych, nah, bro. Okay, so first thing, look at your camera. Okay, what you're gonna see, and it depends on the camera you have. Sometimes you're gonna have to look into this little eyepiece. It's called a viewfinder. All right, you might have to look into it and look at the screen or whatever is going on there. And what I'm talking about, when I'm talking, you through all this stuff, with my camera, I'm talking about the people that have, DSLRs, that have mirrorless cameras. By the way, don't be too concerned about the difference between the two. It's some limitations with mirrorless cameras. There's some limitations with DSLRs, but that's not going to affect, what you're doing, right? So, first thing to keep in mind, turn it on, right? Have your camera. Second thing you will want to do when you start out, when you just turn on your camera, after you're turning it on. Second thing, go to your mode wheel, Okay, you see this right here? This buddy right here? Go to your mode wheel, switch it from whatever you have, switch it to that letter M. Okay? There has to be on your camera an option or somewhere to turn your camera to manual mode. Now, why would you want to do that? Okay? I'll tell you why right now. When I was starting out in photography, okay, I initially, at the beginning, I tried using the automatic mode. I tried to let the camera do all the work for me. I tried to try to say, hey, Nikon, or imagine this is a Nikon, okay? This is a Sony, but imagine this is a Nikon. I was like, hey buddy, do all the work for me. I'll just press the button, right? That is the exact opposite of what you want to do. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen. That's not what you want to do, okay? When you are when you are doing photography, you want to have as much control over your equipment, over your devices as you can. That way you can do whatever you want to do, right? But also the camera sometimes screws up situations, and it just gets a little just gets in the way, right? So the sun is very bright. So first thing you want to do after turning on your camera, go to the dial or go to your settings, right? I'm sure you can find it in the manual or another YouTube video, because it varies among these cameras. These cameras can be very different. They can be very strange. Sony, I know Sony has a weird menu. It sucks, but everything, it varies, right? But this is just, the basics, okay? If your camera has a manual mode available, switch to that manual mode. You're going to thank me in the long run, okay? Because that will make you a better photographer. It will. Because you will have to understand these three things that I'm going to talk about right now. So let's start with the first one. Shutter speed. All right? Shutter speed. So, take a guess. What does it mean? Nah, I'm not going to let you guess. I'll explain it to you. So, shutter speed. Pretty much, and this just goes back to like the fundamentals of what a camera does. What is a camera? I can't explain to you scientifically or, like exactly term for term, but let me just say this. Imagine this right here, my fingers. Imagine this is the sensor, okay? Your DSLR or your mirrorless camera, they're gonna have a sensor inside. I'll show you right now. See that bad boy? Let me close it because dust is flying everywhere. See that bad boy? That was a sensor, okay? This is a sensor. Most, if not all, DSLRs or mirrorless cameras, they will have a sensor. Now, what does this sensor do? The sensor, imagine these are my fingers. Imagine my fingers. Yes, they are my fingers. Imagine my fingers are a sensor, okay? It's that bad boy in the back of the camera behind the lens. Okay, so this is the sensor, right? What's gonna happen is the sensor is going to feel the light, okay? So when I move my sensor and expose it to the light, what's gonna happen is the camera will take the light that is grabbed by the sensor and produce an image inside of the camera. Basically what that means, right? So the sensor is what's getting all the light, and it's pretty much giving you the image in the camera. It captures the image, right? Now, how do we do that, right? And this is where shutter speed comes in. Now, if I were to, have my sensor exposed for I don't know how long, let's like leave it for 10 seconds, and I'm getting all of this light, all of this bright light everywhere into my sensor, what do you think is gonna happen? The image that's gonna come out when I leave my sensor open and exposed to all this light, the image is gonna be bright white. It's gonna be garbage. It's not even gonna, and I'll show you this right now. So let's go and I'll tell you how this works. But if I leave my sensor open for 1/5 of a second, you heard that? That was a really slow one, right? I leave my sensor open for 1/5 of a second. Look at the image. I don't know if you can tell. It's pretty much white, right? What happens is the sensor is exposed too long so that so much light is entering into the sensor and it's creating this bright image. Now, what do you do to counteract this? This is what shutter speed is for. Okay, so you have your sensor, my fingers, okay? Imagine this is a shutter. All right, what is the point of a shutter? Well, look, it's gonna go in front of the camera, in front of the camera sensor, okay? It's blocking all the light. And what it's gonna do is when you press that button to capture an image, it's gonna jump up for however long you set that shutter speed for, and then jump down, right? So if I set it for 1/10 of a second, it's gonna go up, down. And the sensor is gonna be exposed for 1/10 of a second, right? Now, what does that mean? If I have a long shutter speed, if I say, let me leave my shutter open for 5 seconds, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I leave it open for 5 seconds, I'm getting 5 seconds of light hitting my sensor, right? And if I leave it open, let's say for 1/200th of a second, right? So much shorter time frame to leave my sensor open. That's like 1/200th of a second, okay? That's a little amount of light. It's a very small amount of light that's getting onto my sensor, right? Oh, geez, I almost burped. So, what does it mean for shutter speed? All right? Shutter speed, it can range from, you could have your shutter open for maybe like 1/4000th of a second or 1/8000th of a second for some cameras to, 3 minutes, a minute, right? 2 minutes. You could have your shutter open for that long. It all depends on the environment. Where are you? What are you taking photos of, right? And this will affect, how your photos come out, right? It's important to understand that. So, shutter speed, think of it like this. How fast is the shutter inside of your camera? How fast is it opening and closing? How much light are we letting onto the sensor, right? That's shutter speed, all right? And here, I'll show you this right now. So, for Sony cameras, all right, and this is kind of bright. So for Sony cameras, right, I'm going to show you this. Right here, wherever you see where it says 1-5 or, something with the seconds, right? That is going to be our shutter speed. You see where that orange number is changing? That is our shutter speed. Okay, and I change it with this dial because I set it to that, but it's going to be different for every camera. Okay, your shutter speed is going to be that time, right? It's going to be on your screen and you'll be able to figure it out, right? That is going to tell your camera how long do you want your sensor open when you press the button. If you want it for longer times, that usually means that wherever you are, you're not getting enough light, okay? There's not enough light available. So what you want is to keep your shutter open for longer times to get more light hitting the sensor. The opposite can also be said for this. If you're in a place that's super bright, like where I am right now, what you want is to have your shutter speed very quick, right? You want it like 1/200th of a second, 1/1000th of a second. You want it quick so that, look, I just took that photo. I'll show you this. So that you don't overexpose your image. You don't get so much light hitting the back of the sensor, right? Because that will make your photos look like garbage. Let's keep it real, okay? That's shutter speed, right? That's a shutter speed explained. That took a while. Now, the second one, right? And I'm not going to go too in depth with this. I can explain this in another video. The specifics of shutter speed, like what are the other effects, right? But just keep this in mind. A quicker shutter speed, 1/1000th of a second, you're getting less light hitting your sensor. Less light. Keep that in mind. If you have a longer shutter speed, you're getting more light hitting your sensor. Much more light, right? And it all depends on where you are. Now, Aperture, I could say the same thing for Aperture. So, Aperture, right? Take a look at my camera. Do you see that hole right there? Okay, that dark hole. I just tapped the lens. One tip: never tap the glass with your finger. You're gonna smudge it. Don't do what I just did. So, take a look at this Aperture, right? That hole, that dark hole that you see in the middle of my lens, is the aperture. I believe it's the aperture ring, right? Now, aperture pretty much means how open are we gonna have this hole? Is this hole gonna be huge? Right? Is it gonna be huge? Like you see how it just got bigger? Or is it gonna be smaller? Right? You see how it just got smaller? Okay. So, aperture pretty much means how big is the hole that the camera is gonna have? How big is this circle gonna be? Right? And of course, if the circle is huge, right? If we're like f1.8, okay, your lens is gonna go down to different f-stops, right? It's gonna go down to different levels. For some cameras, it will be f3.6, f5.4. For this camera, it goes to f1.8. And of course, you know, with some lenses, they can be more expensive because you go down to lower. I can explain this in another video. But just keep in mind that aperture pretty much means how big is the hole in my lens gonna get? How big will it get? Now, you can take a guess. What does that mean? What does it mean if I have the hole in my lens to be the biggest and most widest and most open? What does that mean for the amount of light that's coming through the lens? Well, if you have a big hole and you're letting all this light come in, what's going to happen is your camera is going to get more light hitting the sensor. Hitting the sensor right here. Your camera will get much more light hitting the sensor. So, I'll show you this right now. If I take this photo at a f1.8, and if I take another photo at f11, look at this difference. Okay? This is the photo at f1.8. If you can barely see it, right? It's pretty much all white. Okay? Now this is the photo at f11. See that difference? The amount of light that your camera, or the amount of light that passes through the lens, right? Think of it like this, right? Like just a hole behind the sensor, okay? If I'm getting this hole much smaller, right? Put the camera on the side so I don't drop it. If my hole, okay, don't make any jokes. I don't want to hear it. I'm just explaining, okay? If the hole is getting much smaller, think of my sensor as the eye. If the hole is getting much smaller, my eye is getting less light. There's less light passing through to my eye. But if I get it bigger, more light passes through my eye. Think of it like that. Think of your sensor as an eye, right? Because, you know, I mean, when you think about it, you know, our eyes are kind of like cameras. I've thought about it before, you know, it's interesting. It is interesting. And let me pull this curtain down real quick. It's getting annoying. Okay? Much better. So, aperture. Aperture is pretty much how wide is your lens going to be. How much light are you going to let in through your lens? Okay? So shutter speed, just to review. Shutter speed. How fast is the shutter? Pretty much how fast is it going to open and close, right? So you have and how long is the sensor going to be exposed to the light, right? So if you have a long shutter speed, your shutter is going to be up for a longer time, and your sensor is going to have more light. If you have a shorter shutter speed, it's going to be like this. Your sensor is going to have a little bit of light, and your shutter is going to go fast, right? A little bit of light exposed to it, and that will affect your image, okay? Aperture, similar, but not like shutter speed. Aperture, just to review, is how wide your lens is opening, right? So if you have a low aperture, right? If you have a low aperture, that means your camera, your lens, is getting huge. The opening in your lens, see that dark circle? That opening is getting bigger. What does that mean? Your camera is letting in more light, okay? If you have a high aperture, like f22, see how small that gets? That small hole gets? My camera is now letting in very small amounts of light because the hole is much smaller. Okay? That's the second one. So we got shutter speed, we got aperture. All right? Third one. I never really understood this, and it varies among camera to camera. it's called ISO. All right, and pretty much what that means is light sensitivity. Okay, how sensitive is your sensor to light? Okay, so we covered, how long is your sensor going to be exposed for, right, with shutter speed, how much light is going to enter to your sensor with aperture, how much light is entering to hit your sensor, okay, and the third one, how sensitive is our sensor going to be, right? And you think about this, just think about it intuitively, right? If our sensor is very sensitive to light, right, that means that when light hits the sensor, it's going to pick up all of that light and it's going to make it much brighter in the image, right? If it's more sensitive. If it's less sensitive, right, that means that the light that's hitting the sensor is not going to be the same as if it were more sensitive. The light is going to be weaker in the image, okay? So I know it takes a little bit to think about, but think of it like this, okay? If you have a high ISO, let's say, I'll show you this with a couple images. If you have a high ISO, let's say, why not? 10,000 ISO, 10,000. And I take a photo right now, okay? Then if you have an ISO of, and remember, light sensitivity. If I'm very sensitive, right? If I'm very sensitive and I get bruised so easily and a guy punches me on my arm, I'm going to be in pain. I'm going to be like, you know what I'm saying? The result is going to be much more severe. It's going to have a lot more impact, right? If I'm not as sensitive, okay? If I'm not as sensitive and somebody punches me, it's going to be like nothing. It will feel like nothing. The same goes for light. The same goes for ISO. If the sensor is more sensitive, the light that is hitting the sensor is going to have a greater impact. What will that do? It will make the image brighter, okay? If your sensor has a low ISO, has a lower sensitivity, the light that's hitting it, right, like me punching my arm, is going to have less impact. It will be less significant. It will have less of an effect on the image. So your image is going to be darker. Okay, so I'll show you this right now. Okay, image with a high ISO of 10,000 and an image with a low ISO of 100. All right, 10,000. Look at that, pretty much white. Okay, lower ISO. So that the previous one, 10,000. This one, 100 ISO. That's a big difference. Okay, ISO. I like to think of it as something you do after you set shutter speed and after you set aperture, okay? Because, and I'll explain this in another video, how do you make them work together? How do you combine ISO, shutter speed, and aperture, right? How do you combine them? I'll tell you how they work together, okay? Because this trifecta, okay, pretty much allows you to take photos and it dictates how your photos are going to turn out. Okay, if you do not understand how to use this trifecta well, your photos will not come out the way you want them to, right? And I will tell you the effects in another video. This video is already like 24 minutes. So, just to review, and this is just to understand, these three things. I'm not telling you how exactly the numbers work, f-stops, stuff like that. No, I'm not telling you that. I'm just explaining to you as best as I can, okay? So, just to review, before I end the video, shutter speed, all right? Shutter speed, how fast or how long is your sensor getting light? For how much time? If you have a high shutter speed, like a quick, like 1/1000th of a second, your shutter, imagine this is shutter, your shutter is gonna be open for 1/1000th of a second. What does that mean? Less light is hitting the sensor, okay? What does that do to your image? If you have less light hitting your sensor, and this is in general, if you have less light hitting your sensor, your image, your photo is going to be darker. There's less light. You can't see as much. It's darker. If you have more light hitting your sensor, it's going to be brighter. Your image is going to be brighter. Okay? It's going to be much brighter. So, shutter speed. Quick shutter speed, less light hits the sensor, darker image. Okay? Longer shutter speed, like 2 seconds, more light hits the sensor before the shutter closes. More light is hitting the sensor, which means a brighter image, which means, there you go, brighter image, right? Okay, aperture, okay? Remember, aperture, how wide is your lens? How wide is it, okay? If you have a very low aperture, okay, that means that your lens is very wide. The hole in your lens is very wide. Okay, this is f1.8 for my lens. Okay, and I'll explain the numbers in another video. But if your aperture is very, if your f-stop, whatever you want to say, is very low, the number for it, that means your aperture is very wide. Now, if your aperture is very wide, the hole in your lens, more light is traveling through the lens. What does that do? More light hits the sensor, brighter image. Okay? Smaller hole in your lens, so if you have a higher aperture, f22, f11, f8, less light is going through the lens. You have less light traveling through the lens. So if you have less light going through the lens, you have less light hitting your sensor. What does that do? Darker image, darker photo. Last thing, ISO, light sensitivity. How sensitive is your sensor to light? Okay, think of it as a weak dude versus a weak dude against a strong guy, right? Or like a fly and a truck. Okay, the truck is traveling at, like, let's say, is going pretty fast. So is the fly, but the fly is very small, right? So anything that hits that fly is gonna have a big impact. The fly is super sensitive to whatever it's hitting it, okay? So it's gonna have a bigger impact when that truck hits the fly, right? It's big, it's very sensitive. So think of it like in terms of light, right? If we have a very sensitive, if we have a very sensitive sensor, light that hits the sensor is gonna be stronger, right? More sensitive sensor means that we have a stronger light entering our image. And what does that mean? Brighter photo, okay? Think of it like that. Now, a lower ISO, think of it from the truck, right? When the truck rams into the fly is like it's like small. It doesn't do anything to the truck. The truck just goes, just keeps going. It just keeps going, right? It just keeps going. It won't have an effect. So the truck is it's not sensitive. It's very less sensitive compared to the fly. The truck is very insensitive. It doesn't care, all right? It doesn't care about the fly's feelings. It's a truck. It's a truck. I mean, come on. So, so because it's less sensitive, the whatever the fly does, when it hits the truck, it's gonna have like less of an effect on the truck. It will do less harm to the truck, right? Because it's big and it's less sensitive. The same goes for the sensor. If the sensor is less sensitive, whatever light that hits this sensor is gonna have less brightness in the image. It's gonna have less of an impact on our image, right? So low ISO, darker image. Why? The sensor is it's less sensitive to the light. Higher ISO, we're gonna have a brighter image. Our sensor is now very sensitive to the light. It's gonna have a greater impact, the light that hits the sensor. All right, this is a very long video, about to be 30 minutes. There you go. That's explaining the three, right? Next video, I might explain something with settings, good settings to try out when you're starting. Or, also maybe, we could get into not taking photos just yet, but get into how do these three work together? Why are they a trifecta? Why do they work together? And it all has to do with, you know, light. The fact that they all have an effect on the light in your photo. All right, that's me. I'm Brad Diaz. Thank you for watching the video. If you watched it through, leave a comment if you have something you want to suggest, or if you have any, you know, concern or whatever. Leave a like as well, or, you know, share the video, right? Share it with your friends who also want to learn photography, and, you know, have a good one. All right, take care.